Hi, my name is Miriam Marston, and I serve as a director of faith formation at a parish in Oregon. Though I'm originally from the East Coast, I'm a consecrated virgin of the Archdiocese of Portland in Oregon. I was consecrated in 2020, and I could not be happier. In addition to my responsibilities at the parish, I'm an author, speaker, and singer-songwriter as well. And I have the privilege of hosting a weekly show dedicated to evangelization on our local Catholic radio station. It's a real joy to be with you all today. And I'm just going to go ahead and share with you that I'm actually not a very good cook. Putting it simply, I cook more to survive than anything else. I know how to use your basic ingredients of vegetables, meat, maybe a carbohydrate of some sort, but really, I just never learned how to cook well. And one way this shows up is that when I cook, I don't actually use any salt. It's not that I don't like it. I never really knew what to do with it. But when I think about this from a biblical perspective, well, Jesus calls us to be the salt of the earth. So I can't dodge this any longer. I have to learn something about salt. In fact, you and I have to learn how to be salt. Now, this call to be the salt of the earth, it appears in the Sermon on the Mount. It's the longest teaching of Jesus that we have in the Gospels. It starts in Matthew chapter 5 and goes to the end of chapter 7. And actually, at the end of that teaching, we hear that those who were listening were astonished at what he said, because he taught as one with authority. If I'm going to learn how to be salt, I think that's a good place to start with that spirit of astonishment in the presence of Jesus. When I hear his teaching, learn about his healing, and above all, when I encounter him in the sacraments, that astonishment adds a new flavor in our life. But it can't stop there. How does that astonishment then compel us to live differently, to live as salt? Well, right before Jesus calls us to be the salt of the earth, he actually lays out what a good salty life looks like. And that way of life can be summed up as the Beatitudes. Pope Francis calls the Beatitudes the Christian's identity card and a blueprint for ongoing conversion. So if we want to learn how to be salt, let's look at the recipe that Jesus gives us in Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 3. He begins, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." A philosophy professor once taught me years ago that whatever is at the center of your life will determine everything else about how you live. So is the center of my life cluttered with things that are not God? Where do I need to be emptied of self, to have that poverty of spirit, so that I can then be filled up with the life of God? Blessed are they who mourn, for they will be comforted. So many of you participating in this event have been touched by sorrow, by grief, by loss. You might be in mourning right now. But blessed are you who are so close to the sorrow of the cross, because there we see how Christ descends into all the chaos and the brokenness, and he meets us precisely where we think hope has been lost. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the land. Meekness is one of those kind of misunderstood words, I think. It's not weakness, but rather it's strength and courage, which is placed at the service of God's will. And that takes a lot of humility and docility and listening to God. Early on in the pandemic, I was having a conversation with my sister in her living room, and it was a pretty serious conversation. There was lots going on. And my little niece was there listening to us as she was eating her goldfish. And at one point, my sister asked, honey, why don't you go into the next room while we have this conversation? And instead of leaving, my niece crawled up into my lap with her goldfish and said very simply, "I don't understand what you're saying, but I like listening to you." And she made it clear she trusted the sound of our voices, even if she didn't really understand what was going on. And it makes me think, do we trust the sound of God's voice? Do we like listening to him? And do we have the meekness then to follow that voice? Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Those of you who've been around children have probably observed them doing this. They'll be playing just fine, and then all of a sudden they'll stop and they'll kind of flop around and announce with great zeal that they're starving and they can't do anything until they've eaten. It's like they don't remember they had a snack an hour or two before. Now, can you imagine what it would be like if we had that same kind of intense hunger for righteousness? Like nothing else in the world mattered. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Pope Francis has this great line in his document, Rejoice and Be Glad. He says, we should be members of the army of the forgiven. Are we members of that army? If we have been touched by the mercy of God, do we then go out into the world as instruments of that mercy? Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Here I think back to the book of Genesis when we hear that God created the world and then looked on it and saw that it was good. Now I think about our interactions with others, and before any comment or judgment or argument or question, do we pause first and say, even if only to ourselves, it is good that you exist? Are we looking upon this person in front of us as God looked upon creation and saw that it was good? I think that's where purity of heart can begin. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. My friends, we could spend 20 seconds on the internet and conclude that our world is not at peace. The world needs to see witnesses of peace, and that means peace at every level. In each heart and home, family, school, workplace, virtual comment box. But it begins simply with this serenity that comes from knowing who we are in Jesus Christ, knowing our deepest identity. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. We heard this in the first beatitude, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So having been filled up with the life of God and then poured out into the world for the sake of this life and this love, that might result in persecution. But we know that our Lord walked that road before us on Calvary. We cannot go anywhere in our suffering where he has not already been. And that is a great and mysterious blessing indeed. So there we have it. Jesus presents us with these Beatitudes and follows it up with, you are the salt of the earth. So together, let's learn how to be salt. And even though I'm not a great cook, I do know that it doesn't take much salt to add a lot of flavor. So if you and I strive for faithfulness and holiness, wherever we might be in the world, you never know what God is going to do with that. We're the pinch of salt, and we'll leave the rest up to God. Thank you so much for this time together today. Please enjoy the rest of this conference, and may God bless you all.